Okay, since the last couple of lectures we have been talking about operator overloading, and in the previous lecture we actually created a program for complex numbers, and we overloaded the addition operator for that. And if you recall, we wrote a program for that in def C++. Let me try to find that. Yes, this is the program which we wrote last time, and it overloaded the addition operator for the complex class. Now let me go through the slides just to make sure that I may not have missed any point in it. So this is a class named complex, and as I have told you many times, whenever we read a class, whenever we read a class code which is written by somebody else, or maybe it is written by you yourself and you are reading it for after a couple of days, so always first of all the first thing to be noticed is the variables or the data members which are there in the class. So here in this class complex we have two variables a and b. Honestly, you need to make sure that you always give meaningful names to the variable. For example, this variable should have been like real, and this variable should have been imaginary, just to make sure when you or somebody else revisits the code after a few days, so one can always understand what does these variables mean. Anyways, here these two variables are a and b, right? Then this particular class has a constructor at line number 5, which takes two arguments. Then there is another constructor which takes no argument. We can call this constructor as default constructor. Default, ठीक है. Default constructor, and this one is the destructor. And then there is a getter, get a function which will basically return the value of a, and then we have a set a function which will receive some value from the user and assign that value to this particular variable a. And similarly we have getter for b, get b. It will return the value of a particular variable, and set b which will assign the value to a variable. And as I told you previously as well, these names getters and setters are from the point of view of a person who is outside the class. For example, if we have a class complex, mplex, and we have a variable a and we have a variable b, and there is a person who is standing here. This is class main, and now he wants to get the value of a. So from his point of view, the function is named getter. So what will happen if he calls get me, let's say, variable a. Now this class will give him the value of a. So this name getter get is from this person's perspective. And for example, this person wants to say, okay, I want to set value of 2 to this variable. So this value of 2 will be assigned to this variable using this set a function. So the name get a and the name set a or get any variable, set any variable, is from the perspective of the person who is outside the class. So that's why. Otherwise you can give these let's say these function any name. For example, this is get a function, you can simply rename it. For example, you can make it a function that int a, or let's say you can say put. Okay, and internally it will have the same functionality of that of get a, but again these setters and getters are conventions. This is a nomenclature of object oriented programming, so we have to follow that, because people around the world will understand this nomenclature. If you come up with your own name, maybe rather most probably people will not be much familiar with this. Now let us come to the next line, where we have a function named print num. It will be displaying this complex number, and at the line number 13, if you see, we have a prototype, and the name of the function is operator followed by plus. So this function is an operator overloading function. To overload the addition operator, this function receives a number of type complex, like this class's instance, and it is getting a reference, and since it is getting a reference to a complex number, that is why this function has in the prototype have made this constant, so that we can only read the variables which we receive here. We should not be able to change. And the return type of this function is complex as well. Right. Now this is the header file of the class complex. Now this is the CPP file of the class complex, where the functions are defined. And if we see here, first of all, this is name of the class followed by the scope resolution operator followed by the name of the function. In this case, this function is the constructor, and it has two parameters I and j, and the value of I is assigned to A and the value of j is assigned to B, right? So this is the overloaded constructor, and this one is the default constructor. If you recall the program we wrote last time in the dev-c, we combined these two things. Let me show it to you. Oh, sorry. For example, at line number 1 and line number 5, we have two constructors. Now, and at line number 1, we have overloaded constructor, and at line number 5, we have the default constructor. But we can combine both of these, like we can make the constructor of the class. It should have the same name as the class, right? And whatever we want to write here, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not writing anything here, but and this constructor takes int I and int j. Now if you see in this slide, we have this constructor and we have this constructor. We have two constructors, but we can combine both of them into one constructor if you assign these variables default values. Okay, so then in this way you have one constructor which performs the role of a default constructor and the role of the overloaded constructor at the same time. And instead here we have two constructors, separately the default constructor and the overloaded constructor. So whichever method you like, that is fine. Both method works, but I think this one minimizes the work you have to do, of course, while typing the program. Now at line number 6, we have the destructor, and which basically destroys an object, and here we are supposed to delete the variables, but this destructor has been created just for the sake of it. But if you feel like writing something here, you can do so. Similarly, at line number 7, we have the we have a get a function. It simply returns the value of a. Now if you see the class here, a and b are the access specifier is not mentioned here, but we all know by default it's private. By default the access specifier is private, so that is why we need to have functions like get a and get b to reach to the values of the variables of the or members of the class. So it simply returns the value of a, and set a function assigns the variable a value which is passed to it in this variable I. Similarly, the same setters and getter functions are there here for the variable b, right? Now this is the print function, and they have in this particular piece of code they have displayed the number a plus b iota. But if you recall, what we wrote in our program was a bit better than what is written in these slides here, because for example this one, right? Now here if you see, because the imaginary part can also be negative, right? So we need not to put always a plus between real and imaginary. For example, if we have number 1 plus 3 iota, so we can also have a number like 3 minus 6 iota. So we need not to have always an addition operation here, we can have subtraction as well. So we the code which we have written is better, right? Then this is the operator overloading function, which is defined of course outside the class, outside the header file of the class. So that's why this first, right, this first is the class name, sorry, yes, wait, this first one is the name, this first one is the return type of this function. Now this thing is the name of the class, and this thing is the scope resolution operator, and the rest is very simple, which you know. This is the prototype of the class. But for example, if we were to write this within the body of the class, then we would simply have ignored this chunk of the code, because we knew we would have known that this function is already part of the class. But since we are defining it outside the class, so that is why this chunk is required, right? Now here they have coded it a bit differently. For example, let me try to hide this. It's not going to get hidden, but so here they receive a number, comp number, and there is a new complex number with the name of x. And what is happening here, they say that x dot a is equal to a. Now a will be the this class's own a plus the a of the comp number which is passed to it. They get added and they are assigned to the a of x. Similarly, b of this own class and b of the comp number which is passed to it, they get added and it get assigned to the b of the instance x, and this x is being returned here. Now whatever we have done here can also be done using single line 8, which initially I tried to hide from you, and let me show it to you because it is actually commented out. But if you see, all of this is happening here in a single line, like this chunk. If you see this chunk, this is written here, right? This is passed to the passed in the constructor, and this chunk which we wrote here, it is actually written from here to here. So you can do it in a single line. Simply an instance of the x is created, and when we have to pass it two variables, and here these two variables are being added and it is passed to x, so that a new instance can be created. So whichever method you like, this method, these three lines are a bit simpler to understand. This requires a little bit of expertise of programming, so whichever you like you can do so. But mind it, here line number 8 has been commented out, so line number 9, 10 and 11 will be executed only. Now in the main program, if you see here, we have created the instance of the complex class C1, and then we display the value of C1, and then at line number 8 another instance of the class is created, C2, and it is being displayed here. And at line number 10 there is an instance of the class complex created, C3, and for this C3, of course, the default constructor will be called, and within this C3, its A and its B will get value 0. However, in case of C1, the A will get value 3 and B will get value 4, right? So what happens here? Now if you notice line number 11, if you notice line number 11, now what is happening here? We are saying that C3 is equal to C1 plus C2. Now the plus operator expect towards its left value and its right value. The plus operator expects to its left an operand of a built-in data type. It can be integer, it can be float, it can be double, but it should be built-in data type. But if we see here, towards the left of plus we have C1, and if you see the data type of C1 is complex. Now what will happen? The compiler will go inside this class complex and will search for the plus function, and when it goes within the class, it will see that this plus function is available here. Now what will it do? It will call the it will call the plus function for this instance, and it will pass this value which is to the right of plus as an argument to this function. So what will happen here is that this plus operator will be called for the instance C1, okay, and to it the argument C2 will be passed, right? So this is how the operator overloading works, and I have explained it to you in the previous lecture while we were writing the complete code, and I am sure that would have been much more easier to follow, but since I have to explain this slide as well to make sure I do not miss any important point, so that is why I am going through the through this code. But if we want to rewrite this line number 11, let me try to rewrite it. We can write it in this, okay, control Z. We can write it in another way, like we can say C3 is equal to C1 and then write operator plus. We are calling the operator plus function of the C1 instance and passing to it C2, and I just noticed that C's are actually small, they are not capital. Okay, now whatever this line number 11 does, line number 12 does the same. Okay, so these two, with an exception of this error, I am removing it here, except of the semicolon. So these two lines are equivalent. The difference is that this line number 11 is more readable. Mathematically it's more readable, and line number 12 is mathematically not readable. Maybe from the perspective of a programmer it may be more readable, but again, readability is from the point of view of the person outside the programming domain, right? So this is how it works. Now let us go to another case study, right, where we are trying to overload the addition operator, and let us suppose let me try to give you an example. Let us suppose there is a person who is very old. Let me try to make this very old person, and this person is very old, okay, and he is very weak as well, and he has two sons. One son, this is son number 1, and okay, this is his second son, okay, and this is his third son. yes, okay, here's this three son. Okay, now this son is a clerk, right? This son is a driver, and this son is a waiter, right? And actually this person known as, let's say, ba ba ji, this person known as Baba ji wants to make sure that whatever salary his sons bring in, he wants to make sure he keeps track of it. Let's say this clerk has a salary of, let's say, 12k, 12,000 per month. This driver has a salary of, let's say, 8,000 per month, and this waiter has a salary of 30,000 per month. Oh, good. Including tips as well. Okay, and then this Babaji wants to make sure that he has a program written for it, and that program, basically in this program he says salary, SALARY, salary is equal to clerk plus driver plus waiter, and whatever the sum should come into this place. So this is the case study which we want to make here. So for this we can write, we have many options, but this Babaji, he wants this thing to be written in this particular form. So if we want this thing to be in this particular form, the first question is that what will be the data type of this clerk, what will be the data type of this clerk, what will be the data type of this driver, and what will be the data type of this waiter. For, of course, they cannot be integer or float or double, because they are human beings. They may have first name, they may have last name, they may have other credentials as well. So we need to have our own data type for this. So I think the data type which we will be creating for it will be, let's say, an employee, right? And here if we see this line, we are basically adding 3 employees. So for, and we are, since we are adding 3 employees, so we need an operator overloading function for that. So this is the case study which we are trying to handle here, and let us see the code. Okay, I will try to program it as well if required, but since I have already coded the complex class code with the operator overloading function, so maybe it's not needed. Let's see what happens. So here this name of this class is employee, name of this class is employee, right? And it has variables employee ID and employee salary, right? And then this class has a constructor which receives 2 arguments, and these arguments are assigned to the members of the class. For example, the first argument ID is assigned to the ID number of the class, and the second variable sal is assigned to the variable salary of the class, right? So this is how it's done. They have made it constant here just to make sure that the value of ID can be copied to another variable. It can be displayed on the screen, but this value should not be changed. So if you ignore these const, it won't have a big issue. But again, it's better to have it there. Then if you see the next function here, now here it is a function named add to, and its return type is double, right? And it receives an employee instance of an employee. It is taking its reference, and that is why it has made it const. But if honestly, if you remove this reference, if you do not make it const, it will still work. So it's up to you. If you want to be very strict in applying constraints, you can do so. But if you ignore these two things, you don't write it, it will work as well. Now we have another function whose name is operator plus. So it is an operator overloading function with the rest of the things between this function add to and the operator function are the same, right? And then we have a third function get salary. It simply returns the value of the salary, right? Now, if we go to the implementation of this add to function here, now it receives an employee. Now what have it done? It has created a variable double, right? And a variable of type double, named total. And what is it doing? In the total, it assigns the value of salary, which will be the salary variable here. And then what it does, the other employee which is being passed to it as a parameter, it is getting the salary of that employee, and basically salary of this the parameter which is passed to it, and its own salary are added, and these are returned in wherever this function is being called. And if you see these three lines, similarly these three lines are the same, but here this is a simple function, and here this one is the operator overloading function, right? So now in the main program, what will happen, that here we have employee named clerk. It has ID 111 and his salary is, or her salary is 10,000 rupees. We have another employee, the ID of an employee is 222 and the salary is 6,000, right? Now what are we doing here? Here we are calling the clerk's add to function and passing to it the driver. Now in the clerk's add to function, here this driver will be passed, and if you see if you see salary of this will be better. Now salary of the driver is 6,000 and salary of the clerk is 10,000, and when it comes here, now this salary, because we have called the function add to of the clerk class, right? So here the salary will be 10, 2, 3, and this salary will be that of the variable passed to it, which is the driver, whose salary is 6,000. So together they will get added and will be 16,000, and that 16,000 will be returned to it here, and it will be assigned to sum. Now this is one way to do that. Similarly, you can do the same thing by calling the operator overloading function in this fashion, or you can do the same thing by calling the operator overloading function in this fashion. In all these three lines, same output will be achieved, but in this sorry oh, in this particular function, in this particular call, the add to function will be called, but in these two lines, the operator overloading function, that is the plus function, will be called. These two lines look a bit different, but they call the same function, right? So this is how it works. Now the actual issue is there. For example, we have got a clerk plus a driver plus a waiter, right? Like here we created instances clerk, and we created another instance driver, and we had no third or fourth or fifth instance. So here there was no issue. We were simply adding two variables of the same class, right? But let's suppose we have a scenario like this, or let's have another instance as well. For example, this is clerk, this is driver, this is waiter, and let's say this person is let's say this person is a security guard, let's say, okay? And now we want to achieve, and just think about it for a while, will this line execute or not? Okay, this let me brainstorm it with you. For example, this plus operator will expect towards its left and towards its right the operators of the built-in types like integer, double, or float. But here on the left and the right we have user-defined variable. Now what will happen? It will go to the class, and there it will find the plus operator and it will work fine, right? This is what you must be thinking, but actually this is going to create an error, right? For example, if you were simply adding a driver and a clerk, it is fine, right? If you are simply adding a waiter and let's say a security guard, it is fine. But as soon as you add a third variable like driver, clerk plus let's say waiter, now this is going to create an issue. How that issue will be created, let me explain. Now you see what will happen according to, if you see the prototype of this function here I've written a lot of stuff, so I'm focusing here. If you see this plus operator, and for that matter if you see this function, these two functions, right? And okay, they receive a variable of type employee, that is fine, but what do they return? They return a variable of type double, right? Now keep this in mind and let me get back where I was explaining. Let me repeat. The addition operator, the operator overloading function for addition is returning a variable of type double. Now what will happen here, these two variables will be added, okay, and these will be replaced by a variable of type dbl, okay. Now what will happen, now this will be like double plus a waiter plus a servant, right? And now once the first two variables are added, and then when the third variable is to be added, now this plus operator will be expecting towards its left and right variables of built-in types, but towards its left there is a variable of built-in type now, okay, and towards its right there is a variable of a user defined data type. Now there is no such function for a built-in type that can add a user defined variable to it. For example, previously here we had a user defined data type, so when the plus operator notices that towards my left there is not an integer, there is not a float number, it's not a let's say double variable, there is a user defined data type, so it goes into the class of that user defined data type and searches for the operator of overloading function, and then things go fine. But here if you see we have now we have obtained a user defined data type, and there is no class for this user defined data type which will have a function that will receive a user defined variable, so it won't work if you go beyond it. So if you are adding two variables like in this case and like in this case they are fine, but if you go to a third or fourth variable it won't work. So what can be the solution to it? Think about it. What can be solution? I think the solution is let me give you a hint. The solution is very simple. Okay, if you see the prototype, if you focus, oh sorry, if you focus on the prototype, the solution is going to come to your mind. Think about it. Yes, what you can do, you can simply remove this variable double, right? Instead of double, the return type of this function should be what? Should be an employee, right? So if the return type, okay, if the return type of this function is an employee, okay, now if you add a driver and then you add a clerk and then you add a waiter and then you add a, let's say what was that, security guard, now what will happen, these two will be added, and let's say another variable temporary, and that temporary is of type employee. Temporary plus w plus let's say security guard. Now again temporary is of type employee. Now these two employees will get created, then another employee, let's say temporary 2 plus security guard, these two employees will be created, and then the final employee, let's say temporary 3 will be obtained here. So this is how it will work. But again, we need not to just change the return type of the variable, we need to change the internal implementation of these of the function as well. Now whatever I have explained here, whatever I visually tried to explain to you is written here as well, so and is explained in the shape of written text here as well. But since I have already covered that a lot, so I am just going through it quickly and going towards the solution, and the answer is the return type should be employee. And here and let me do one thing. Discard, let me copy that function and paste it here so that we can compare the actual difference between the two. For example, this is the code, and here this is the different code, right? Okay, no. Or, and we can do something as well just to make sure. Oh, chalo, is तरह ठीक है. Now if we see, this was the previous this was the previous code, and now we have changed it. Now the operator overloading function is same, this is same, return type has changed here, now it is employee, previously it was double. Now within an employee, previously we were creating a variable of type double, now we are creating a variable of type employee, and that employee we call total. We are assigning it to a dummy ID and a salary of 0, right? And here we say total, which is an instance of the employee, make the total salary is equal to this salary, and salary of the person itself, and the salary of the employee which is passed to it, and then return this total, as compared to what was happening here. Here total, since it was an independent variable, it was not an instance of the class, so it was being assigned a value, and that total was being returned, which was a double. Here instead the total, which is a type of employee, that is being returned. So in this way you can achieve multiple additions and operations, additions and subtractions and multiplication and other operator overloading stuff using this way. So I hope you have got the point, and this is I think this is enough for today. Thank you.